My parents moved my unemployed brother into my house and demanded that I support him. So I took everything back, and what happened in court ended it all for good. You know, I never thought I'd live to see the day I had to drag my own flesh and blood into a courtroom. But after years of quiet family exploitation, it was either that or lose everything I'd worked for: my home, my sanity, and even my self-respect. That day in court, when the truth finally spilled out, it didn't just change my life. It shattered the very foundation of what I thought family was. My name is Matthew Wilson, and for 35 years, I was the responsible one. Growing up in a modest middle-class family, my parents always drilled into me the importance of education and hard work. While I was busting my butt, getting good grades, working summer jobs, and saving every penny, my younger brother, Jason, was different. He was the charming one, always able to talk his way out of anything. I'd get grounded for missing curfew, but Jason? He'd somehow negotiate a lighter punishment for the exact same offense. This pattern, it followed us our whole lives. College was my escape. I worked relentlessly, juggling a partial scholarship with a 20-hour-a-week IT job, surviving on instant noodles and pure caffeine. I graduated with honors, landed a tech job in Chicago, and slowly, meticulously paid off my student loans. Meanwhile, Jason dropped out of community college after one semester, claiming it was beneath him. He bounced from job to job, never staying put for more than 6 months, always with a convenient excuse. And every single time, my parents would swoop in, paying his rent, buying him a new car. After he wrecked his uninsured one, they just enabled him completely. Over the next decade, I climbed the corporate ladder, moving from a tiny studio apartment to finally, buying my dream home 3 years ago. It was a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a peaceful suburb, a place I poured my heart into, painting walls, installing fixtures, making it truly mine. I even had a dedicated home office for my side projects. During this time, my relationship with my family was steady, but distant. I'd visit for holidays, call on Sundays. Jason, though, remained a constant source of drama. New job opportunities would excite him, only for him to quit weeks later because his boss was out to get him or the work was beneath his skills. He genuinely believed he deserved a high-paying position without ever putting in the effort or getting the education. I tried to help, I really did. I put in a good word for him at my company for a customer support role. He showed up late and underdressed. I spent hours helping him with his resume and job applications. He never followed through. I even offered to pay for coding classes, thinking he might follow my path, but he quit after 2 sessions, saying it was too hard. My parents, still enabling him, would complain to me about his irresponsibility but never actually enforced consequences. They'd do his laundry, cook his meals, and hand him spending money while he played video games all day. When I expressed my concerns, they'd get defensive. You don't understand, Matthew. Jason is different. He needs more support. Then, last February, the call came that changed everything. It was a cold Tuesday and I'd just finished a demanding day. My mom's voice was tight with worry. Matthew, we need to talk about Jason. He lost his job, and his landlord isn't renewing his lease. He has nowhere to go. My stomach churned. He needs to stay with you, just for a few weeks, until he finds something. Weeks? I knew better. But after 20 minutes of relentless pleading from both parents, I reluctantly caved. Fine, I told them. He can stay in the guest room for a few weeks. But he has to actively look for work and contribute to groceries once he has an income. My dad promised, of course, Matthew. You'll hardly know he's there. I was naive. I spent the next few days preparing the guest room, buying extra toiletries, and even researching job openings for him. Part of me, the hopeful part, thought this could be a chance to reconnect. Looking back, I had no idea the nightmare I was inviting into my carefully built life. That Saturday, my parents arrived with Jason in their aging SUV. I expected a suitcase or 2. Instead, I watched in growing dismay as they unloaded box after box, bag after bag. Jason carried in a huge TV, a gaming console, sports memorabilia. My dad struggled with a heavy dresser. That clearly wouldn't fit in the guest room. What is all this? I asked, blocking the doorway. Just the essentials, Jason shrugged. looking unshaven and wearing wrinkled clothes, completely unfazed by his life setback. My mom bustled past me. Jason needs his things, Matthew. We couldn't possibly store all this at our house with the renovation. But this was everything he owned. That evening, I cooked dinner, hoping to discuss expectations. Instead, it was my parents, reminiscing about childhood and Jason complaining about his former boss. The guy had it out for me from day one. He grumbled, helping himself to a third serving. Have you started looking for new positions? I tried gently. He waved dismissively. I'm going to take a week to decompress. That place was toxic. My parents nodded sympathetically. He deserves a little break. When they finally left, my dad pulled me aside. Thank you for doing this, son. Family helps family. It will just be for a little while. I nodded, already feeling a crushing sense of dread. That first week confirmed my worst fears. Jason slept until past noon. When he finally emerged, he'd make an elaborate breakfast, leaving the kitchen a disaster. Despite my polite reminders, the messes remained until I, inevitably, cleaned them myself. In the evenings, he'd monopolize the living room TV, playing video games at ear-splitting volume, even when I told him. I had early meetings. Empty snack bags and soda cans piled up around the couch. When I asked about his job search, he gave vague responses. By Friday, I was at my breaking point. It's not working out, I told my best friend, Alex. During a lunch break, pacing in my backyard. He treats my house like a hotel, but with no respect. Alex, always sensible, advised me to set firm boundaries. That evening, I sat Jason down. Look, I know this is difficult, but I need you to actively look for work. And you need to clean up after yourself and respect quiet hours. He rolled his eyes like a teenager. You sound like Dad. Relax, bro. I'm dealing with a lot right now. I understand, but these are reasonable expectations. I need to see effort. He muttered, fine. I'll look at some job sites tomorrow. The next morning, I left for a client meeting. 4 hours later, I returned to an empty house and a kitchen disaster. Empty beer bottles littered the counter. A half-eaten pizza sat open in the living room. Several of my craft beers were missing. Over the next 2 weeks, it only got worse. I'd find evidence he'd invited friends over while I was at work. Unfamiliar glasses, cigarette butts on the patio, furniture rearranged for gaming sessions. Then, one evening, I came home to find my cherished vinyl record collection out of their protective sleeves. One of my most valuable albums, assigned first pressing, had a visible scratch across its surface. Did you have people over again? I asked when he finally emerged. Just a couple guys from my old job. We were catching up. I showed him the scratch. He glanced at it dismissively. That tiny mark? It probably plays fine. Besides, nobody listens to records anymore anyway. I took a deep breath, counting to 10. That's not the point. These are my possessions. They're important to me. You need to ask before having people over, and they need to respect my things. He just muttered, whatever, grabbed his keys, and walked out. That weekend, my parents called. I tried to express my concerns, but they immediately became defensive. He's going through a rough patch, Matthew. You need to be more understanding. I felt like I was the unreasonable one for expecting basic courtesy from my 32-year-old brother. The conversation left me frustrated, doubting myself, just as similar conversations had throughout my childhood. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a situation that would force me to choose between family expectations and my own well-being. Weeks turned into months. Jason showed no signs of leaving or finding work. What was supposed to be temporary was becoming permanent. My utility bills soared, grocery expenses doubled, and my once peaceful home became a constant source of stress. One morning in early April, about 6 weeks after he moved in, I noticed he'd used the last of my expensive coffee without mentioning it or offering to replace it. A small thing, but it perfectly illustrated the pattern of take, no give. I tried a new approach. I found several job openings that seemed like good fits, showing him printouts. This warehouse position pays better, and this customer service role offers benefits. Jason scoffed. Warehouse work again? No thanks. And customer service is just getting yelled at by Karens all day? I'm looking for something in management. I gently pointed out that management usually requires experience he didn't have. These could be stepping stones. I'm not settling, he said firmly. I deserve better than minimum wage grunt work. When I argued that some income was better than none, he accused me of not believing in him. You've always thought you were better than me, he snapped during one heated exchange. Just because you got lucky with your tech job doesn't make you superior. This isn't about superiority, I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. This is about you taking responsibility for your life. By the 2-month mark, I was at my breaking point. Jason had plastered posters on the guest room walls, spreading his belongings throughout the house, effectively establishing a permanent residence. He had zero consideration for my routines. My polite requests had escalated to firm demands, which he either ignored or met with temporary compliance before reverting to the same behaviors. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. I was gardening when my parents' car pulled into the driveway, unannounced. We thought we'd surprise you, my mother chirped. Is Jason home? He's inside, I replied, pulling off my gloves, probably still sleeping. My father frowned. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my mother immediately began fussing in the kitchen with containers of homemade food. My father settled into the living room, flipping on the sports channel without asking. The familiar dynamic of my childhood home was now playing out in my space, and a surge of resentment washed over me. Jason finally emerged, greeting them warmly. They didn't comment on his late rising or disheveled appearance. Instead, my mother served the food, and we sat down to an impromptu family lunch. The conversation was pleasant until I mentioned that Jason and I had been discussing job opportunities. Matthew thinks I should take any job, even if it's beneath me, Jason said, rolling his eyes. I expected my parents to support me. Instead, my father cleared his throat. Well, son, finding the right fit is important. Jason shouldn't jump at the first opportunity if it's not right for him. But it's been 2 months, I pointed out, and he hasn't contributed anything. An uncomfortable silence fell. My parents exchanged glances. My mother reached over to pat my hand. Matthew, dear, we need to talk about the living arrangement. Yes, we do, I agreed, a flicker of hope that they would finally help me set boundaries. Your father and I have been thinking, she continued, since you have this big house all to yourself, and Jason is family, it makes sense for him to stay with you until he gets back on his feet properly. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. How long are we talking about? My father shrugged. As long as he needs. That's what family does. We support each other. I have been supporting him, I said, my voice rising slightly. For 2 months, with no end in sight. And we appreciate that, my mother said soothingly. But Jason has always struggled more than you. Some people need more time to find their path. I'm 35 years old, Jason interjected. I can't just take any minimum wage job at this point in my life. I stared at him. You're 32, not 35. And yes, sometimes adults have to take jobs they don't love to pay their bills. The point is, my father cut in firmly, Jason is staying here. And honestly, Matthew, we were hoping you might help him with his car insurance and phone bill, too, just until he lands on his feet. The room seemed to tilt. My parents hadn't come to help resolve the situation, they'd come to formalize and expand my role as Jason's caretaker. The temporary arrangement was being revealed as the permanent situation I had feared. Absolutely not, I said, standing up from the table. I agreed to a few weeks of housing while he actively looked for work. I did not agree to indefinitely support a grown man who refuses to take responsibility for himself. We raised you to value family above all, my mother said, her voice wounded. I can't believe you would turn your back on your brother when he needs you. I am not turning my back on him, I insisted. I am refusing to enable behavior that is ultimately harmful to him and unfair to me. Harmful, Jason scoffed. Living in your precious house is harmful to me. Living without consequences or responsibility is harmful to anyone, I retorted. The conversation devolved. My parents deployed every emotional manipulation tactic they'd refined over decades. Guilt, comparisons to cousins, veiled threats. Jason alternated between looking smugly vindicated and playing the victim. By the time they left 3 hours later, I felt emotionally drained and utterly conflicted. My values screamed loyalty, but my sense of fairness and respect for boundaries screamed this was wrong. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, listening to Jason playing video games. Well past midnight, wondering how I'd become trapped. The next morning, blurry-eyed, I made a careless error in an important piece of code. "You look terrible," my colleague Rachel commented. At lunch, "Everything okay?" I found myself unloading the entire situation. Rachel listened intently, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Matthew, this isn't a family disagreement," she said firmly. "This is exploitation. They are taking advantage of your success and good nature. Have you considered getting legal advice? Because from what you've described, your brother has established tenancy in your home, which could complicate things." Her words stayed with me. That evening, I researched tenant rights in my state. Rachel was right. Even without a formal lease, someone living in a residence for a certain period could claim tenant rights, making removal a complex legal process. As I closed my laptop, I realized what had begun as a favor was rapidly becoming a legally entangled situation that could impact my financial stability, mental health, and home ownership. Something needed to change. And soon. The situation reached its breaking point on a Wednesday in early May, nearly 3 months after Jason moved in. I'd been in back-to-back virtual meetings since 7 a.m., dealing with a critical software issue. By 4:30, we'd finally resolved it, and my boss suggested I take the rest of the day off. I gratefully accepted, looking forward to a quiet evening. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed unfamiliar cars. The sound of music and laughter drifted from my backyard. With a sinking feeling, I walked around to find Jason hosting a party. 6 strangers lounged on my patio furniture, drinking my beer, using my grill to cook steaks I'd bought for a special dinner. "Matthew," Jason called out with false cheer. "You're home early. Come join us." I stood, frozen. Cigarette butts littered my lawn. Red wine stained my outdoor sofa cushions. 2 women were in my hot tub, which I rarely use due to the cost of heating it. "Can I talk to you?" Inside, I managed to say through clenched teeth. Jason rolled his eyes dramatically for his friend's benefit. "The homeowner needs a word," he announced. "Be right back, guys." Inside, it was worse. Dirty dishes filled the sink, empty bottles and food containers scattered throughout the living room. And there, on the mantel where it had always held a place of honor, was my grandfather's antique pocket watch. Or rather, where it should have been. "Where's Grandpa's watch?" I demanded, my voice rising with panic. Jason shrugged. "No idea. Maybe you moved it." "I never moved that watch. It was my grandfather's prized possession, given to me because, as he put it, Matthew understands the value of time. It was priceless." A frantic search revealed the watch on the bathroom counter, submerged in a puddle of water from an overflowing sink. I carefully retrieved it, my heart sinking at the visible damage. Something inside me snapped. All the frustration, resentment, and suppressed anger of the past months crystallized into a cold, clear resolve. "Everyone needs to leave," I announced, walking back outside. "The party is over." "Come on, man," one of Jason's friends protested. "We just got the grill going. I did not authorize this gathering, and you are all trespassing on private property," I stated firmly. "Leave now, or I will call the police." They grumbled but began gathering their things. Jason stood with his arms crossed, face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "What is your problem?" he hissed once his friends had departed. "You completely humiliated me." "My problem?" I echoed in disbelief. "You have taken over my home, contributed nothing, shown zero respect for my property, and now you have damaged a priceless family heirloom." "It was an accident," he muttered. "And this whole my home, my property thing is getting old. Mom and Dad said half this house should be mine anyway." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "What are you talking about? I bought this house with my own money." Jason smirked. "They said family property should be shared. You're just being selfish, hoarding all this space for yourself when I have nowhere to go." The conversation that followed revealed a disturbing truth. My parents had been feeding Jason a narrative that my success obligated me to support him. They'd told him my refusal to let him stay indefinitely was selfish and unfamily-like. No wonder he had shown such entitlement. He genuinely believed he had a right to my home and possessions. That evening, I received an unexpected email from my neighbor, Thomas. "Thought you should." "No," he wrote. "Your parents were at your house today around noon, using a key to let themselves in. They were carrying boxes inside. I assumed you knew." Attached was a security camera clip, clearly showing my parents unloading more of Jason's belongings and entering my house with a key I had not provided. A cold feeling washed over me. Not only were they enabling Jason, they were actively working behind my back to establish him permanently in my home. The violation of trust was staggering. Further investigation revealed even more disturbing discoveries. Jason had been using my Amazon account to purchase items for himself. He'd given my home address for several new credit card applications. He'd even listed me as his emergency contact and financial guarantor on a job application. I sat in my home office late into the night, surrounded by evidence of how thoroughly my boundaries had been violated. My grandfather's watch, now sitting in a bowl of rice, in a desperate attempt to dry it out, seemed to symbolize everything that had gone wrong. My grandfather had trusted me, and I had failed to protect it because I had allowed myself to be manipulated into a situation that violated my own values. After 3 months of chaos, financial strain, and emotional manipulation, I made my decision. I would reclaim my home and my life, even if it meant confronting deeply held beliefs about family obligation. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in years and scheduled a consultation with Stephanie Miller, an attorney specializing in real estate and tenant law. "Based on what you've described," Stephanie said, "your brother could potentially claim tenant rights despite never having paid rent or signed a lease. In our state, establishing residence for more than 60 days can create an implied tenancy." My heart sank. "So, I can't just ask him to leave?" "You can ask, but if he refuses, you would need to go through formal eviction procedures," she explained. "However, there are several factors working in your favor. You have documentation of the original agreement as temporary, evidence of property damage, and proof of unauthorized entry by your parents. We discussed options." Stephanie was direct but compassionate. "Many people feel guilty about setting boundaries with family," she noted, "but allowing someone to take advantage of you rarely helps them in the long run. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do is to stop enabling destructive patterns." Her words resonated deeply. For years, I had equated family loyalty with accepting mistreatment. Perhaps true loyalty meant wanting better for Jason than a life of dependency and entitlement. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt I was moving in the right direction. I spent the rest of the day developing a strategic plan. I moved my most important documents and valuables to a safe deposit box. I transferred funds to a new bank account. I documented the current state of my home, photographing damage and making inventory lists. I changed passwords on all my accounts and placed a fraud alert on my credit report. That evening, I looked at old family photos, trying to reconcile happy memories with the current reality. Had our family dynamic always been this dysfunctional, or had something fundamental changed? My resolve strengthened. This wasn't about rejecting my family. It was about establishing healthy boundaries that would ultimately benefit everyone. With that realization, I finally felt ready to take action. The next morning, I requested emergency vacation days from work. My manager, Karen, understanding, approved immediately. My first task was securing my remaining valuables. I rented a small storage unit across town and methodically packed items of both financial and sentimental value. It felt strange, almost like I was fleeing my own home. But Stephanie had warned me. Eviction situations could sometimes turn volatile. Next, I completed the financial separation. I closed joint accounts I'd naively established with my parents years ago. I removed Jason as an authorized user on a rarely used credit card. I set up automatic payments for utilities from my new account. By afternoon, I was installing security cameras at key points around my property. I made no attempt to hide them. I wanted Jason to be fully aware. I also changed the locks, keeping the only copies of the new keys for myself. When Jason returned that evening and found himself unable to enter, he called me in a rage. What the hell, Matthew? My key doesn't work. I know, I replied calmly, opening the door. We need to talk. His anger turned to confusion when he saw the cameras. What is all this? Are you spying on me now? Please sit down, I said, gesturing to the dining room table where I had prepared copies of documents. The original text messages establishing the temporary nature of our arrangement. Photos of the damage to my property, evidence of unauthorized use of my accounts, and finally, the formal eviction notice Stephanie had helped me prepare. What is this? Jason asked, picking up the notice. I am giving you 30 days to find alternative housing, I stated, my voice steady. Despite my racing heart, as outlined in this document, you have violated our agreement in multiple ways. I am no longer willing to provide housing or financial support. Jason's face flushed red. You can't kick me out. I live here now. Actually, I can, I replied. This is my property, purchased with my money. Your tenancy was conditional on respecting my home and actively seeking employment, neither of which has happened. Mom and Dad will never allow this, he threatened, pulling out his phone. They do not have the legal authority to determine who lives in my house, I said, remaining calm. And I have already notified them of my decision. This was a bluff I would need to pay off shortly, but it had the desired effect. Jason hesitated, phone in hand. Furthermore, I continued, I have evidence that they entered my home without permission using a copied key. That is a legal entry, Jason. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. Look, maybe things got a little out of hand. We can work something out. The time for negotiation has passed, I said firmly. You have 30 days to make arrangements. During that time, you will abide by house rules, including no guests. Without prior approval, no use of my personal belongings, and quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And if I refuse, he challenged, then I will pursue immediate legal eviction based on property damage and unauthorized entry, which could result in a court record that would make it difficult for you to rent elsewhere in the future. He stormed out, slamming the door. Within minutes, my phone began ringing. My parents. Matthew Wilson, how dare you treat your brother this way? My mother's voice was shrill with anger. After everything we have done for you, I am setting necessary boundaries, I replied. Jason has taken advantage of my hospitality for 3 months with no indication of change. He is family, my father bellowed through the speaker. You do not turn your back on family. I am not turning my back on him, I corrected. I am refusing to enable behavior that is harmful to both him and me. What followed was perhaps the most difficult conversation of my life. My parents alternated between rage, emotional manipulation, and threats. They claimed I was heartless, ungrateful, selfish. They threatened to disown me, to tell the extended family about my betrayal, even to come and physically remove the eviction notice if you enter my property without permission. Again, I said calmly when they made this threat, I will file a police report for trespassing. I have security footage of your unauthorized entry yesterday. There was a shocked silence. You would call the police on your own parents? My mother finally whispered. I would protect my legal rights against anyone who violates them, I confirmed, including family. I don't even know who you are anymore, my father said, his voice heavy with disapproval. The son we raised would never turn his back on family like this. The son you raised, I replied, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed, believes in responsibility, respect, and reciprocity in relationships. Jason has demonstrated none of these. And frankly, neither have you in this situation. You will regret this, my mother warned. When you need your family someday, and we are not there for you, you will remember this moment. I already regret that it has come to this, I acknowledged. But I cannot continue to sacrifice my well-being for someone who shows no respect or gratitude. After they hung up, I sat in silence, emotionally drained, but oddly at peace. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had stood firm against the tide of family expectation and obligation that had always threatened to drown my own needs and boundaries. That evening, my phone rang again. Expecting another angry call, I was surprised to see my sister Samantha's name. Samantha, 5 years older, had moved to California years ago. Her Contact with the family increasingly limited. Mom called me in tears, she said without preamble. Apparently, you're the villain in tonight's family drama. You could say that, I agreed wearily. Good for you, Samantha said, surprisingly. It's about time someone stood up to their manipulation. For the next hour, we talked more openly than ever before. She shared her own experiences with our parents' enabling of Jason and their emotional manipulation when she had tried to set boundaries. She had chosen geographic distance. She supported my more direct approach. They'll make your life miserable for a while, she warned. But stand firm. This is long overdue, and maybe, just maybe, it will be the wake-up call Jason needs. Her support was unexpected and deeply meaningful. We promised to stay in better contact, and I hung up feeling less alone in what had become a full-blown family crisis. Over the next few days, the situation at home deteriorated as expected. Jason alternated between ignoring me completely and making passive-aggressive comments. He deliberately violated house rules, playing music loudly, leaving messes. My parents called multiple times daily, each conversation a variation on their initial outrage. Through it all, I maintained my resolve, documenting every violation and consulting regularly with Stephanie. The security cameras proved invaluable, capturing evidence of Jason's provocations and deterring potentially more serious retaliatory actions. A week after serving the eviction notice, I returned home to find Jason in an unexpectedly conciliatory mood. I've been thinking, he said, looking uncharacteristically serious. Maybe we can work something out. I'll start looking for a job more seriously, and I can pay some rent once I'm employed. For a moment, a flicker of hope. Then he continued, Mom and Dad said they could help with my rent for the first few months. They think $500 would be fair for the room, and of course, I'd need access to the rest of the house, too. I realized this wasn't a genuine change of heart, but another attempt to establish permanency, now with my parents' financial backing. The amount was well below market value, and there was still no concrete plan for independence. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but my decision stands. You need to find your own place within the time frame specified in the eviction notice. His facade crumbled instantly. You're going to regret this, he threatened. Mom and Dad are talking to a lawyer of their own. They say I have rights as a tenant that you can't just ignore. They are correct that you have certain legal protections, I acknowledged, which is why I am following proper eviction procedures. But no judge will force me to house you indefinitely against my will, especially given the documented issues. As he stormed off, I realized the confrontation was far from over. In fact, it was about to move from the personal arena to the legal one. 2 weeks after serving Jason with the eviction notice, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing my parents and brother. It contested the eviction, claiming verbal agreements had established a more permanent living arrangement and that Jason had tenant rights. I immediately forwarded it to Stephanie, who called me within the hour. This isn't entirely unexpected, she said, but it does escalate the situation. They're requesting a hearing before a judge, which means we will need to present our case formally. My stomach nodded. What are our chances? Based on the evidence you've gathered, I believe we are in a strong position, she assured me. But court proceedings are never guaranteed. We should prepare thoroughly. Over the next week, Stephanie and I compiled a comprehensive documentation package. Photographs of property damage, security footage showing violations, text messages establishing the temporary nature of the arrangement, bank statements showing the financial burden, and a detailed timeline of events. I also prepared a statement outlining my perspective, focusing on facts, not emotions. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at home grew increasingly tense. Jason had abandoned any pretense of looking for work or respecting house rules. My parents continued their pressure campaign through daily calls and messages, now interspersed with communications from their attorney. The court date was set for June 4th, almost exactly 3 months after Jason had moved in. As the day approached, I experienced a range of emotions: determination, anxiety, guilt, and a deep sadness that family relationships had deteriorated to this point. I found solace in conversations with Samantha and the steadfast support of friends like Alex and Rachel. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed in my best suit and arrived early to meet Stephanie. The waiting area was sterile and tense. When my parents and Jason arrived with their attorney, they pointedly sat on the opposite side of the room. My mother appeared to have been crying. My father wore an expression of stern disapproval. Jason looked uncharacteristically polished. "Remember," Stephanie murmured as we were called in, "stick to the facts and timeline. The judge will be looking for clear evidence, not emotional appeals." Judge Patricia Harmon was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. She reviewed the documents silently for several minutes. "This appears to be a family dispute over residential occupancy," she noted. "Mr. Wilson, as the property owner and complainant, you may present your case first." With Stephanie's guidance, I outlined the situation: the initial agreement for temporary housing, Jason's failure to seek employment, the damage to property, the unauthorized entry by my parents, the escalating tension. I presented our evidence methodically: photographs, security footage, financial records. "Your Honor," I concluded, "I have made reasonable efforts to help my brother, but the arrangement has become untenable due to his actions and my parents' interference. I am simply asking to regain full control of my own property." Judge Harmon nodded and turned to the opposition. My parents' attorney presented their side with practiced eloquence. He characterized me as cold and unfeeling, emphasizing family obligation and suggesting I had verbally agreed to a long-term arrangement. He painted Jason as a victim of economic circumstances. My mother testified next, her voice quavering. "We raised our boys to believe that family takes care of family. Matthew has this big house all to himself while his brother struggles. What kind of person turns their back on blood?" My father followed with similar sentiments, portraying me as selfish and ungrateful. Jason's testimony painted him as actively job hunting, but facing rejection after rejection. He claimed I had verbally agreed he could stay as long as needed. Throughout their testimony, I maintained a neutral expression, though internally I was stunned by the selective memory and outright falsehoods being presented as truth. Stephanie jotted notes rapidly, occasionally squeezing my arm reassuringly. When cross-examination began, Stephanie's experience and preparation became evident. She methodically addressed each claim with contradicting evidence, text messages showing the explicitly temporary nature of the arrangement, Jason's social media posts revealing outings with friends, not job interviews, bank records showing consistent withdrawals at bars and entertainment venues despite his claimed financial hardship. The turning point came when Stephanie called a surprise witness, my Aunt Margaret, my father's sister. I hadn't known she would be testifying. Stephanie had arranged it to prevent any interference from my parents. "Mrs. Campbell, what can you tell the court about similar situations with the respondent, Jason Wilson?" Stephanie asked. Aunt Margaret, always the straight shooter, did not hold back. "Jason lived with me and my husband for 8 months in 2019 after another job loss. What started as a few weeks turned into months of the same behavior. No rent, no job hunting, damage to our property. When we finally insisted he leave, my brother, Jason's father, called us heartless and tried to convince other family members to pressure us into letting him stay." She went on to describe 2 other relatives who had experienced similar situations with Jason, establishing a clear pattern of behavior. The judge listened attentively, occasionally glancing at Jason, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then came the most damning evidence. Stephanie presented text messages between my parents that Jason had apparently forwarded to me accidentally when trying to send them to a friend. In these messages, my father stated their plan clearly. "Once Jason is established at Matthew's place, we can work on moving into when we retire next year. That house has plenty of room for all of us, and Matthew makes more than enough to support everyone. He just needs to accept his family responsibilities." A shocked murmur ran through the courtroom. My parents looked stricken, while Jason stared at the floor. I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me as the full extent of their manipulation became clear. This had never been about temporary help for Jason. It had been about establishing a multi-generational living arrangement at my expense, without my knowledge or consent. Judge Harmon called a brief recess, during which my parents and their attorney huddled in intense conversation. When court resumed, the judge addressed us all with a stern expression. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented, I find in favor of the complainant, Matthew Wilson. The respondent, Jason Wilson, has no legal claim to continued occupancy of the property. Furthermore, the evidence suggests a troubling pattern of manipulation and boundary violations by all respondents. She turned specifically to my parents and Jason. The court orders Jason Wilson to vacate the premises within 48 hours. Any damage to property during this period will result in additional legal consequences. Furthermore, Robert and Linda Wilson are hereby prohibited from entering the property without the explicit written permission of the owner. Turning to me, her expression softened slightly. Mr. Wilson, while the court recognizes your legal right to control access to your property, I would encourage all parties to seek family counseling to address the underlying issues that have led to this unfortunate situation. With a final bang of her gavel, the hearing was concluded. As we gathered our documents, I caught my mother's tearful gaze across the room. For a moment, I saw not the manipulative parent of recent months, but the woman who had once bandaged my scraped knees and celebrated my achievements. The complexity of family relationships had never felt more apparent or more painful. Outside the courtroom, my parents and Jason hurried away without speaking to me. Stephanie placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," she assured me. "Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most." As I drove home, alone, victory felt hollow. I had won in legal terms, but the cost in family relationships seemed immeasurable. Yet beneath the sadness was a growing sense of liberation. For the first time in months, I would soon have my home, my privacy, and my autonomy restored. The path forward would be difficult, but at least it would be mine to determine. The 48 hours following the court decision were tense but orderly. As required by the judge, a sheriff's deputy supervised as Jason packed his belongings under the watchful eyes of my parents. I maintained a polite distance. My mother attempted several emotional appeals. "I hope you're happy now," she said, tears brimming. "You've torn this family apart." I resisted the urge to argue. "I'm sorry you see it that way," I replied quietly. "I still care about all of you, but I needed to establish boundaries." My father remained stoically silent, his disapproval radiating in waves, but the fight seemed to have gone out of him. Jason himself fluctuated between sullen silence and bursts of resentment. As he carried out the last of his boxes, he paused at the door. "You know, you'll need family someday," he said, "and we'll remember this." "I hope what you remember," I replied, "is that respect and responsibility matter in any relationship, including family." When they finally drove away, the house felt eerily quiet. I walked through each room slowly, taking inventory of the space that was fully mine again. There was damage to repair, rearranging to do, and a lingering sense of violation to process. But underneath it all was a relief so profound it felt almost like physical lightness. That first night alone, I ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and sat on my back patio watching the sunset. The silence was no longer oppressive, but peaceful. I slept better than I had in months, without the background anxiety of wondering what new boundary would be crossed the next day. The following weeks were devoted to reclaiming and repairing my space. I repainted rooms, replaced damaged items, and rearranged furniture to erase the memory of unwelcome occupation. I found a watchmaker who specialized in antiques. He believed he could restore my grandfather's pocket watch, though the cost would be substantial. Some things, I was learning, could be repaired with enough care and expertise. Others would forever bear the marks of damage, but could still function and hold value. Work became a refuge. With my home situation resolved, my focus and productivity returned. My manager, Karen, noticed the change immediately. Contact with my family ceased entirely for nearly 2 months. No calls, no messages. Samantha kept me updated, reporting that our parents were telling extended family a highly edited version of events that cast me as the villain. I chose not to contest this narrative, trusting that time would eventually reveal the truth to those who mattered. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early August, my phone displayed a number I hadn't expected to see. Jason's. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Matthew, it's Jason. His voice sounded different, less entitled, more subdued. Hello, Jason, I replied neutrally. How are you? I got a job, he said. Assistant manager at Cartech. Been there 6 weeks now. Congratulations, I said, genuinely surprised. That's great news. There was an awkward pause. Before he continued, look, I've been doing some thinking and talking to someone at counselor. I wanted to say I'm sorry for how things went down. I took advantage, and I wasn't fair to you. The apology was so unexpected that for a moment, I couldn't respond. Thank you for saying that. I finally managed. It means a lot. I'm not asking to come back or anything, he clarified. Quickly, I have my own place now, a studio apartment. Small, but it's mine. You know, I'm paying my own bills for the first time in, well, a long time. We talked for nearly an hour. Jason shared insights from his counseling about dependency patterns and his fear of adult responsibility. I shared my perspective on how our parents' different treatment of us had affected our relationship. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. Before hanging up, Jason asked tentatively, do you think we could grab coffee sometime? No pressure, just, I miss my brother. I would like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. 2 weeks later, we met at a neutral coffee shop. The conversation was sometimes awkward, but fundamentally different. Jason spoke about his job with pride and shared his plans to take night classes toward a business certificate. I listened, cautiously optimistic about this new version of my brother emerging from the ashes of our conflict. Rebuilding a relationship with my parents proved more challenging. Their sense of betrayal ran deep, compounded by the public revelation of their plans in court. My first attempt to reach out, a card on their anniversary, received no response. The second, a phone call to my father, resulted in a brief, formal conversation that felt like talking to a stranger. The breakthrough came unexpectedly at Thanksgiving, nearly 6 months after the court hearing. Samantha had returned from California and organized a family dinner at her hotel suite, neutral territory for all involved. My parents arrived, looking older than I remembered, the strain evident in new lines on their faces. The initial hour was painfully polite. Then, as we sat down to dinner, my mother suddenly put down her fork and looked directly at me. I have been angry with you for a long time, she said, her voice wavering. But seeing Jason now, holding a steady job, living independently, I'm beginning to wonder if you did him a favor after all. It was never about hurting Jason, I said quietly. It was about not enabling behaviors that were harmful to him and unfair to me. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. We may have been too protective of him over the years, and perhaps not fair to you in our expectations. It wasn't a full apology, but coming from my proud father, it was significant. The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary, addressing years of family dynamics. There were tears, raised voices at times, but also moments of genuine connection and understanding. As the months passed, our family relationship slowly rebuilt on new foundations. Jason continued his progress. My parents gradually acknowledged their role in creating unhealthy patterns, though old habits occasionally resurfaced and required gentle but firm boundary reinforcement. The experience changed me profoundly. I became more discerning in all my relationships, recognizing that true love includes respect for boundaries and reciprocity of effort. I learned that saying no to exploitation is not selfish, but necessary for healthy connections. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that standing up for myself did not mean losing my family, but rather creating the possibility for more authentic relationships. 1 year after the court hearing, my grandfather's watch returned from the specialist, restored to working condition, though still bearing subtle marks of its damage. It seemed a fitting metaphor for our family, functional again, maybe even stronger in some ways, but forever, marked by the experience we had endured together. Today, as I look back on that difficult chapter, I realize that what happened in court truly did end one story and begin another. The old dynamic of enablement and exploitation was replaced, gradually and imperfectly, with a new family paradigm based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. It was not the ending any of us would have chosen, but perhaps it was the one we all needed. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt in the short term but proved beneficial in the long run, or faced a situation where standing up for yourself meant risking important relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most necessary growth. If you found value in my story, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and personal boundaries. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes true family love means having the courage to say no when saying yes would harm everyone involved.